Look, Florian, it's a real pleasure to have you joining me today to discuss sustainability in aviation.
Absolutely happy, to join. Sustainability really is at the core of what we do, and I mean it. And I'm happy to talk more about it and give you the reference points for our activities and our engagement there.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing your insights. So let's delve right into it. I guess kind of first question to cover, Florian. It'd be fantastic to hear your perspective on what some of the game-changing shifts and opportunities are within sustainability, particularly as it pertains to aviation. And kind of a second note on that as well is whether you see those perspectives as being regional or global.
Yeah. So, first of all, what's driving me personally in this, and how does that relate then to my engagement here? I'm absolutely convinced that we as a society, we need to, move to a fully sustainable way of living on this planet as soon as possible, right? I read, Limits to Growth, Club of Rome, the 30-year edition when it came out in 2002, and it has really shaped my career decisions since then, because I'm fully aware that whatever we do, we have to look at it in a systemic context. We are getting to the limits of the resource, the physical limits of our planet so much faster than people really think. And having traveled extensively, I have experienced and seen so much of that, firsthand already. And there's no way of neglecting that anymore. There wasn't 20 years ago, and even less so today. So to your second question, no, this is not just regional. This is global. And I think it is in a matter, and I'm convinced this is a matter of, human survival that we're talking about here. If we just simply continue doing what we've been doing in the past, we're not going to survive this. And therefore, it is paramount that every industry sector gets to full sustainability as soon as we can. Now, what does that mean for our sector, right? The aviation sector. Prior to joining Volocopter more than 6 years ago, I worked for Siemens. I was creating technology startups, companies for Siemens. And we had been, delving on the innovator's dilemma, right? Made public and famous by Clayton Christensen, Harvard professor, over and over again. And, staying in the logic of the innovator's dilemma, it is extremely hard to start significant change, to kick off disruption when you're being part of a large organization that has a lot to lose by discontinuing their existing ways and their existing habits. And therefore, I believe disruption only happens in small, independent, outside companies. It's extremely hard for large incumbents to really harness the forces of disruptive innovation. And when it comes to aviation now, the disruption of aviation towards turning to sustainability, towards actually bringing fully electric aircraft to reality will start in the urban context. Why? Because that's where it is easiest to start. That's where it's important, to be emission-free, where it's important to bring distributed electric propulsion and the unprecedented safety levels that it offers to fruition. That's where you find a market that is willing to pay the extra cost of distributed electric propulsion. And that is where it's easiest from a physical boundary perspective, right? We can build a perfectly viable business around a two-seater aircraft, which is perfectly feasible with existing battery technology today. And this is why I believe disruption needs to happen in all sectors. Disruption will start in the aviation sector, in the urban air mobility context. And that is where the Volocopter offering is squarely positioned, because this is where the transformation of mobility will see its next chapter. That's where it will start. And then hopefully we will see the trickling down effect, in this case, the trickling up effect of ever larger aircraft being fully electrified. And that to me is the absolute precondition for fully sustainable aviation going forward. Long answer, sorry.
No, that's perfect. And it's a space that I've been following with excitement, because it's great to see this type of development happening within the aviation field. And I mean, sustainability aside, or on top of that, you only need to go to a city like London, Los Angeles, Paris to see the need for alternative transport modes. Absolutely. So with that being said, Florian, what have you observed to be the critical pivots for or against the development and wide-scale usage of sustainable transportation?
So again, I want to answer this question more from an aviation perspective, because that's where we see the major, let's say, transformation occurring that will have a deep and profound effect also on ground transportation in the long run, right? We will see humble beginnings. That's what we're seeing right now. But in the long run, over decades, it will completely unfold a dynamic that I think few people dare to predict right now. But I'm absolutely convinced that's the transformation that we were going to be seeing here. What is pivotal for that? So first of all, when we talk about sustainability, it's not just about an electric vehicle or an electric aircraft or other. You really need to think sustainability more holistically. That's why I do like the ESG approach. I like the UN development goals, because they proclaim a more holistic approach to what does sustainable mean, not only in an ecological, but also in a social and governance context. So when we talk about aviation and electrifying aviation, I believe that e-fuels and so on are only going to be an interim solution. Long term, again, the physical limits of our planet are such that we cannot adopt, let's say, e-fuels at a grand scale. We just don't have the cultivating land to support that, because we need that land for food generation and hopefully preserving some of the wilderness that we still have on this planet and some of the beautiful biodiversity that we still have. So I absolutely believe that battery electric, ultimately, hopefully the fuel cell will be the solution in terms of the technologies that we will apply to the aviation sector. And the pace at which we can apply those technologies will unfortunately not only be driven by this sector alone. I think the aviation sector, what we currently see, is a benefitor of developments, technological advancements that we see in other industries, right? Those are the shaping elements here. First and foremost, of course, the electrification of ground transport by the automotive manufacturers, that will drive the available battery technology also available to our purposes primarily, right? And that's where we expect the breakthroughs to come from. Then secondly, of course, any electric vehicle needs to be charged with 100% renewable energy. So a complete transition of our energy generation landscape to renewable, 100% renewable, is without any alternative. And that cannot happen fast enough. I'm really hopeful by seeing, for example, the levelized cost of energy generation, from photovoltaics, for example, really dropping to record lows, right, in places like Texas or Saudi Arabia. That really gives me great hope that it makes now financial sense to actually bet on these technologies rather than any other, energy generation source. So I predict a time where we will have such sophisticated generation capabilities that we will have abundant energy generation that is fully renewable. And once that is the case, that will make it less critical on whether you are using 1 or 2 kilowatt hours per kilometer of transportation, because what is clear, mobility in the air will always physically consume more energy than on the ground, as long as you're not congested or have to go long detours. That's of course where we can already show a good ecological balance today. But I think long run, I do think that the air transportation mode will also prevail from an energy consumption perspective, because we don't have any negative penalties, any negative effects anymore of the energy generation formula. That is of course also a point in time that is very desirable to achieve, but sometime down the road. I don't expect to get there within the next 5 years, probably more towards the next 20 years, hopefully. Lastly, then it's all about the necessary regulatory regime supporting the shift to fully electric transportation, also in the air. Regulators worldwide are very open in that. They're very much engaged. They obviously don't allow any shortcuts, but in some instances they have said, well, yeah, obviously we need to move away from our traditional thinking in some instances and allow a new approach in order to really cater to the physical constraints again of electric flying. Just to give you a concrete example, historically you used to have fuel reserve requirements on each aircraft. So that is to say, when you get to the end of your your expected journey, you need to have half an hour of fuel reserve in your gas tank or in your fuel tank. Well, that's not viable for an electric aircraft that is struggling to actually make that trip in a safe manner on a fully electric basis in the first place. So obviously, when you now restrict these initial use cases to a well-known environment, to a very well predictable time frame where you know what weather to expect, when you have a perfect, 4-dimensional map of your trajectory, then you can move away from that 30-minute reserve requirement, and for example, replace it with a requirement to say, okay, you always need to make sure that you have a perfectly safe emergency landing spot reachable, within your reserves. And that is something that is absolutely feasible. And this is one example of where regulation has paved the way for the widespread adoption of electric flight. I think obviously, aside from the technical and the regulatory elements, we need to pave the way in public acceptance. And we always see a little time lag between what is technologically possible and the public, widespread public acceptance. I think we need to get better in adopting new technology faster, in avoiding these, constant struggles of the supporters and the defenders against, new technology adoption. But we don't have a choice but to jump on new technologies as fast as we can. Obviously, always in full awareness of the risk associated with it, but that needs to be faster. And I think what we can, as an industry, do for that is really familiarize people with the new technological capabilities as early as possible. That is the one reason why we're showing our test flights publicly in places all around the world, because we want to open the public's eye towards the capabilities that we now have, to start getting familiar with those technologies and feel comfortable in adopting them as soon as we are able to provide them in a commercial sense.
Excellent. What has the reaction been? Have you been able to gauge a reaction from, for example, which was quite widespread in the media and documented well in the media, your Oshkosh test flight? Have you been able to see public perception respond well?
We have found out, in our flights, I mean, we've flown in European capitals, we've flown in Singapore, we've flown in Dubai, in Oshkosh, publicly always, that the people respond extremely positive to actually witnessing an air taxi, a Volocopter flight in that case, for themselves, right? Where there was skepticism on what does this look like and how does it move and what is it, what's the sound, the acoustic signature of such a vehicle, isn't it going to be a nuisance? Once they've seen and witnessed for themselves, they were excited, and we can prove that because always we do our surveys, and have, for example, a scientific survey pre and post flight, that really clearly shows the very positive perceptions that we can generate by actually giving people access to the technology and having them witness it. So no, I think that is effort well invested into paving the way for widespread public acceptance. The reactions are phenomenal.
Excellent. And people see the vehicle and perhaps in their mind associate it with the sound you would get from a traditional helicopter, and then are probably very positively surprised by what they hear.
Absolutely. So, most people, that's the reference point, the helicopter, which, kind of creates a lot of skepticism about, do I really want many of them flying overhead in a city? And no, there's just no comparison. The Volocopter is the quietest aircraft. It sets the acoustic benchmark in the whole industry, because we have these 18 rotors. We only have one source of acoustic generation, which is our rotors that are all, we have 18 rotors, but they're all operating within the same limited frequency band. So that is completely different from 3 different noise generators that you have on a traditional helicopter that are all operating in very diverse bands. So we have none of that, flapping noise, none of that perceived disturbance by a helicopter noise. The Volocopter always, you can continue talking when it takes off and lands next to you. So it's that quiet. And, we can talk, let's say, 65 decibels at takeoff and landing. That doesn't really tell you much. You really want to witness it for yourself. And that's when you start to be convinced. And that's what we've always accomplished. So I'm not, worrying about public acceptance for that once we have actually shown it to enough people around the globe.
That's amazing. That's excellent. And now, if we think about, let's say, the evolving regulatory and consumer values that are taking place, how is Volocopter responding? And it's taking into context as well that we've had the COVID-19 crisis. Has that impacted the way you are working and your response?
I mean, the emergence of this industry, urban air mobility, advanced air mobility, is being followed with great excitement, but also a healthy degree of skepticism, I would say. Why? Because people are questioning, the degree of sustainability that you can actually get to with such a mode of transportation. And I think that's a totally legitimate, conversation we need to have. So as Volocopter, we are very much committed to making this as sustainable as possible from the outset, and then moving to fully sustainable as soon as it's practically possible, because we need to as a society. And for example, yes, we are fully committed to all electric only vehicles at this point. We are fully committed to 100% renewable energy in our batteries, right? So whatever we do today, we are at 100% renewable energy or electricity in our batteries that we use. We are also looking to, what are the next generation batteries that have a better ecological footprint also in the creation of the battery, and then in the long use, second use, recycling, upcycling ideally of the batteries, then after we have used them for the Volocopter purposes. Well, we are getting engaged in all of those activities. For example, there's a really interesting dynamic here in our region where people are trying to source lithium in a different way than in Bolivia or Chile, what we see, which always comes along with high ecological concerns, where you can actually get it from a slurry that we use in geothermal sources here locally, for example, right? Not many people know about this, but there are interesting technological approaches that can help us make the next leap towards full sustainability, and we are fully supportive of that. Of course, as much as we can at this stage of the company development, right? Our impact at this point is still really small compared to other electric vehicle players and so on. So clearly, I think we need to be aware that we can't change the world from one day to another. We need to make sure that we go in a sensible path to become relevant and influential first, while already paving the roadmap to then also exert that influence, upon our industry and beyond. For example, when I'm being invited by the World Economic Forum, to talk on panels or hold speeches around sustainability or urban air mobility going forward, I'm, for example, always really open to CO2 prices and things like that, because I don't think that we can move to full sustainability fast enough as a society. We just need to set a level playing field. I mean, clearly, Volocopter is acting in a very global, competitive marketplace. So we can't afford to be, let's say, restricted to specific regulation in one region that doesn't apply to other regions. We would have a competitive disadvantage that would keep us from actually becoming relevant and then hopefully exerting a positive influence there. So it needs to be a global playing field, but as long as that is ensured, I'm all for let's say setting the right market boundaries to make that transition faster than later.
You mentioned, Florian, there, and I have to pick up on it, because I think lithium is one of the first things people come up with when they want to counter the technology. Can you share just a little bit more on this more sustainable way of sourcing it?
So, there's a company here located, or they're active globally, but they're also kind of opening up now, first sources here in Europe, where they're taking geothermal slurry to really separate, the thermal element of the slurry that you want to get from, the underground water from, and then exerting certain lithium combinations out of that you can then use to actually, make batteries out of, let's say, sustainably, responsibly sourced lithium sources, which I think is a great potential, and we should really pay more attention to that. Secondly, also recycling needs to play a much larger role going forward, and I think there's a physical boundary need, for full cradle-to-cradle recycling economic circles, because there is no alternative to that. So we might as well just, set the right course of action today, and I think that's also has to do with government interaction there, that they need to start acting in a concerted manner. And I do hope that COP26 coming up is going to also play a part in that regard.
Excellent. I'm glad you brought that critical aspect up. It's an interesting space for sure. So with all that being said, Florian, what do you see, or what do you think are the most important behaviorable changes organizations and consumers will need to implement to have an impact?
Well, the most important one is, I think we can do everything, let's say, the United Nations or, World Economic Forum, they come up with all of their campaigns and all that. That's all good. But I think ultimately, what we have to get to is we have to get to a common understanding as a society that one, we are all in this together. There is no national independent, ways to cope with climate change alone. So that just, once that is understood, I think it's clear that there is no alternative to actually coming together and finding compromise on a global stage. One. Two, I want to act in a way that if we just, I think we know what we can do and what we can't do with today's technology, but just preaching limitations and what people shouldn't do, I fear it is an alternative, but I don't think it will be attractive enough to really change the behavior of billions of people around this planet, particularly those that feel left behind and that feel like they have a right to catch up as well. So I just simply feel that that's a route that is not going to be sufficiently successful. So I feel the only alternative really is to create a vision of a future that is both desirable as well as sustainable. And the only way that I see to get us in that direction is technology. So I think there needs to be a common consensus that let's explore and support the types of technologies that provide the potential for this desirable yet sustainable future. And that's what we need to, let's say, create the incentives towards, right? That's again where the governments are being asked to start acting. And then I think the people will start following down that road. Imagine having an iPhone would have been the right ecological thing to do because it was so desirable. The technology penetration was so fast within just 4 years. I remember these impressive pictures of the inauguration of Barack Obama's first term and then the second term. In the first term, no one had an iPhone. The second term, everybody was holding up their iPhone. And within 4 years, just everyone had it. And if we can create similar technological solutions that are similarly attractive, that are economically compelling, yet provide an answer to the challenges, right, are part of the solution, that would be huge because we could see rapid change in the right direction. And I think that's what we need to focus on. And that's where I also see, my personal, let's say, part of trying to be part of the solution, as well as Volocopter's part of trying to be part of the solution, in which we're putting our thoughts to every day here.
Excellent. It's fantastic to hear and also follow what Volocopter is doing in this space, and I'm very excited to see the continued journey and the work that you do. So thank you very much, Florian, for sharing your insights today.
Thanks for your interest, Aaron.